Faith is a silent flame, lit when everything seems dark. It is not born in victories, but in the moments when man no longer understands anything. It is when prayers go unanswered, doors remain closed, and the heart, for a moment, wonders if God still hears. But it is precisely in this silence that faith begins to be shaped. Many confuse faith with optimism or hope, but it goes beyond that. Faith is choosing to trust when there are no guarantees. It is saying yes, even when everything around seems like a no. And the most curious thing is that no one starts with a mature faith. Faith grows, and this growth goes through stages that reveal how willing the heart is to remain, even when the sky seems silent. Today, you will go through the 5 levels of faith. You will understand why so many stop in the middle of the journey, and how God transforms the curious believer into an unshakable believer. First comes curiosity, when the soul approaches the divine without understanding why. Then comes belief, a still fragile faith that needs signs and proofs. Next comes the trial, the fire that burns illusions and reveals what is true. Then comes surrender, the point at which man stops controlling and simply trusts. And finally, unshakable faith, the stage of those who have already understood that God does not need to prove anything. It is enough to be. If you feel that your faith is weak, if you have prayed and the sky seems silent, this video is for you. Here, you will discover that God's silence is not rejection, it is training. Because before trusting God on the outside, man needs to learn to find Him on the inside. Faith is not born ready, it is polished between doubts, falls, and restarts. And whoever remains until the end discovers that the fire did not come to destroy, but to purify. Before we continue, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel and leave in the comments which city you are watching from. This way, I will know how far this message is reaching and how many are still willing to strengthen their own faith. Level 1. Curiosity. The first look at the sky. The journey of faith begins with something simple, an interest. It is not yet conviction, it is curiosity. A brief look up, a question that arises in the midst of weariness, a desire to understand the invisible. It is when man feels that there is something beyond what the eyes can see, but still does not know what it is. This spiritual curiosity is the first touch of grace, the silent call that awakens the sleeping soul. Curiosity is fragile, but sacred. It is the breath that precedes the flame. Many despise it, thinking that seeking God without total certainty is a lack of faith. But in fact, that's how it all begins. No one approaches God because they understand. They approach because they feel. And this feeling, even confused, is already an answer to a divine invitation. Think of someone who has never had deep contact with faith. One day, facing a problem without a solution, they decide to pray. The words come out trembling, without knowing if anyone is listening. But deep down, something changes. It's not a miracle, it's movement. Curiosity opens a crack through which light enters. And when the light enters, even in silence, it begins to rearrange what was lost. At this stage, faith is observant. It does not walk yet, it only contemplates. But all walking begins with the desire to understand, and this desire is so important that God treats it with care, because He knows that today's curious soul can be tomorrow's convicted soul. Spiritual curiosity is the beginning of revelation. It makes man look inward and ask, what if there is something more? This question is the beginning of all transformation, because when the heart allows itself to question with humility, the sky is already answering. Level 2. Belief. The mind accepts, but the heart still oscillates. After curiosity comes belief, the first real step within faith. Man begins to believe in God, to pray more often, to feel that something is listening to him. But belief is still young, and the heart inconstant. It is the stage in which the mind accepts the divine, but the heart still seeks proof. Faith begins to be born, but needs signs to sustain itself. Here, the believer lives on experiences. He believes when everything goes right, but doubts when the answer is delayed. His faith depends on circumstances, and this makes it fragile. God seems close when the day is good and distant when the silence is prolonged. It is the phase of spiritual enthusiasm, intense but unstable. This is the moment when many confuse emotion with faith. They think that feeling is the same as believing, and when they don't feel, they believe that God is gone. But true faith does not depend on what is felt, but on what is chosen. Believing is deciding to remain even when the heart does not understand. It is learning to walk by the word, not by the wind of emotions. Think of someone who has just met God. He prays, cries, feels peace. But at the first obstacle, fear returns and makes him question whether everything was real. He does not realize that the oscillation is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of growth. Faith is being tested to learn to walk alone, and all learning begins with imbalance. Belief is the soil where God plants the purpose, but until the seed sprouts, it must first die within the earth. This period of uncertainty in which man prays and does not see is the moment when faith ceases to be an idea and begins to become life. Therefore, God allows the oscillation because he knows that each doubt overcome is one more root in the heart. Level 3, trial, the fire that purifies gold. The moment comes when faith needs to be tested, not so that God discovers its strength, but so that man discovers where it comes from. The trial is the stage in which the believer matures. Everything that was once emotion becomes choice. Everything that was sensation is transformed into decision. It is here that God's silence hurts the most. The answers cease, the doors close, and the heart wonders why. It is the crossing of the spiritual desert, that place where the sky seems distant and faith seems too fragile to resist. But the desert is the laboratory of faith. It is in it that man learns to trust without guarantees, to walk without a map, to pray without immediate return. The trial is the point at which many give up. They confuse the test with rejection, the silence with absence, and the delay with abandonment. But true faith is born when man realizes that God is not silent because he is gone, but because he wants to teach listening. God speaks in the noise when the heart is new, but when the soul matures, he speaks in silence so that man learns to listen from within. Think of Job, who lost everything and still declared, "Though he slay me, yet will I hope in him." This is the faith that fire does not destroy. It purifies. Suffering, when endured in trust, ceases to be punishment and becomes school. And each tear shed in faithfulness is transformed into testimony. It is here that man discovers what he would never have learned in ease, that faith does not flourish in abundance, but in lack. It does not strengthen in victories, but in losses. And that, when God seems most distant, it is because he is closest to the character he is shaping. The trial is the forge where faith ceases to be theory and becomes gold, and no gold is pure without going through fire. Level 4, surrender. The rest of who trusts after the fire comes rest. Not because the fight is over, but because the heart finally understands that it no longer needs to win alone. Surrender is the turning point of faith. The moment when man lets go of the reins and lets God lead. It is here that faith ceases to be an attempt and becomes trust. Surrendering is not giving up. It is recognizing that fighting against the inevitable is not courage, it is pride. It is when the soul realizes that there is a difference between wanting control and having peace. Surrender does not come by force, it comes by surrender. It is born when man understands that everything he was trying to solve alone was always too small compared to what God could do. Surrender is a silent but powerful act. It is when man begins to pray less, asking, and more thanking. He no longer begs for the problem to end. He asks for the purpose to be fulfilled. The faith that surrenders does not question time, it only trusts the author. Imagine someone who has gone through years of struggle, trying to change what was outside, without realizing that the real battlefield was inside. One day, tired, he kneels and says only, "Lord, your will be done." And in that instant, the weight falls. Not because the pain disappeared, but because the soul understood that there is rest in obeying. Surrender transforms the heart. It erases anxiety, heals fear, and teaches that waiting is not wasting time. It is trusting in God's time. The man who learns to surrender discovers that there is no mature faith without renunciation, because believing in God is good. But trusting in Him when everything seems lost is what makes him truly a son. And it is at this point that the sky smiles. Because the believer who learns to rest in God no longer needs proof. He has become the living proof that trusting is worth it. Level 5, unshakable faith. The calm of who has already understood everything. The point comes when man no longer seeks explanations. He just trusts. Not because he gave up trying to understand, but because he learned that understanding God's will is not as important as walking with it. Unshakable faith is born when the heart stabilizes in the midst of the storm, when what happens outside no longer has the power to shake what has been established inside. This is the faith of those who survived doubt, crossed the desert, and chose to remain. They no longer live on miracles. They have become living testimonies that God is faithful even when the scenario seems contrary. Unshakable faith does not need emotion. It needs conviction. It is calm, mature, silent. It does not shout, does not demand, does not negotiate. It just remains. This faith is not measured by words, but by firmness. It is not shown in pulpits, but in daily decisions. It is the faith that continues praying even when no one else believes, that continues obeying even when the result is delayed, that chooses to forgive when it would be easier to give up. The man of unshakable faith is not the one who never feels fear. It is the one who has learned to cross fear without giving in. He understands that faith does not remove the storms, it only changes the way to cross them. And when everything around him crumbles, he remains standing, not by his own strength, but because he has already been sustained from within. Unshakable faith is the highest point of spiritual maturity. It does not depend on signs because it has already learned to see God in the subtext. And whoever reaches this level discovers the secret that sustains all those who believed until the end. God never promised that it would be easy. He promised that it would be possible. This is the faith that hell respects and heaven recognizes, because nothing is more powerful than a man who trusts in silence. The journey of faith is not a straight line. It begins with curiosity, grows through belief, matures in trial, is purified in surrender, and reaches fullness in absolute trust. Each stage has its pain, but also its beauty. Because God does not want just emotional believers, He wants convicted children. And conviction is only born when the soul learns to trust even without understanding the way. Perhaps today you are still in the first levels, trying to believe despite the doubts. Perhaps you are in the middle of the trial, waiting for an answer that does not come. Or perhaps you have already reached surrender, learning to rest in the midst of uncertainties. Regardless of where you are, the process is the same. God does not want to test you, He wants to transform you. And everyone who perseveres in this process discovers something that no speech can teach. That faith is not just believing that God can, but resting in the fact that He knows what He is doing. Unshakable faith is not the destiny of a few. It is the call of all, but only those who resist doubt and remain in the desert reach there. Because true faith is not the one that moves mountains by impulse, it is the one that continues praying even when the mountains do not move. And when the soul understands this, fear loses its voice, anxiety loses its strength, and time loses the power to steal peace. Man ceases to expect miracles and becomes a miracle. He ceases to seek signs and becomes a sign for others. Matured faith is the proof that God's love not only saves, but sustains. If this message reached you, subscribe to the channel and tell in the comments where you are watching from. May each word of this video rekindle in you the flame of trust. Because in the end, faith is not about understanding the way. It is about walking, even without understanding.